If you own an Insta360 GO 3 and you are thinking about upgrading to the new GO 3S, Insta360 has good news for you by offering you a simple and cost-effective option, and that is to simply buy the standalone GO 3S camera. But how simple and how cost-effective is this option? Well, let's find out. Last month, and just 1 year after introducing the GO 3, Insta360 introduced the successor, the GO 3S, with a host of new capabilities, not least of which, of course, is the ability to record in 4K. Now, if you own the original GO 3, of course you would like to own the new GO 3S, but having spent around $400 to buy the original GO 3, you're probably a bit reluctant to spend that same money again in order to upgrade to the newest version. Well, the good news is that you don't have to. With the launch of the GO 3S, Insta360 also launched a standalone version of the camera aimed at GO 3 users, giving them an easy path to upgrade to the newest version. So today we're going to take a closer look at this upgrade option. We're going to see how it works, just how easy it is to do that upgrade. We're going to look at how effective it is to see if there are any downsides with doing the upgrade, and we'll also look at how cost effective it is compared to just selling off your old camera and buying the new one. So there's a lot to cover here, so as usual I'll place the chapters up here and on the video timeline. And very importantly, before we get started, just to mention that this video is not sponsored, paid for, or influenced in any way. I purchased all of the equipment with my own money, and the opinions are entirely my own. And of course, if you're enjoying the video, remember to give us a like and consider subscribing to the channel for a lot more similar content. So let's get on with it. Okay, so let's go through the upgrade process. So I have my GO 3 here, I have my freshly delivered GO 3S standalone camera, but before we even get this out of the box, the first thing we need to do is to update the GO 3 to the latest firmware. And when I say the GO 3, I mean both the camera and the action pod. Now, in order to update the firmware, we're going to connect using the Insta360 app. Now, as I'm sure you know, you can use the app to actually wake up the camera in order to connect to it. But in this case, we're not going to do that because that only powers on the camera. As I mentioned just a moment ago, we are looking to update not only the camera, but also the action pod. So what we're going to do is power on both devices by hitting the power button on the action pod. That of course powers up the camera and powers up the action pod. Now we can connect to it with the Insta360 app and make sure the firmware is fully up to date. Now, when you connect to it through the app, it will tell you straight away if there is a firmware update, or you can also go into the settings and verify that you are on the latest version, and I'll show those latest versions on the screen here. So now that we have the GO 3 and the action pod both updated to the latest firmware version, let's go ahead and get out the GO 3S standalone camera and pair it to the GO 3 action pod. Okay, so here I have my GO 3 inside the original GO 3 action pod. Here I have my new GO 3S standalone camera, which we're going to be pairing with the GO 3 action pod. So I'm going to start out by removing the GO 3. I'm going to power on the GO 3S by pressing and holding, and then simply drop it into the action pod. It disconnects the GO 3. It has now connected the GO 3S, and if you have not yet done so, the first thing you're going to have to do with your GO 3S is activate it using the app, so we'll do that now. So we open up our Insta360 app and connect to our new GO 3S, which is this one. Confirm the connection on the device. So now we are connected to the Go 3S camera module through the app, and as you can see there is a new firmware version available. So let's go ahead and download that and install it before we continue. So our update is complete and the camera is going to restart now. And finally, we activate our Go 3S camera and the process is now complete. Okay, so now with the Go 3S activated and all modules updated to the newest firmware version, let me just show you how easy it is to switch back and forth between the two different cameras. So right now my Go 3S is paired with the Go 3 Action Pod simply by removing it, of course. My Go 3 camera is powered on, as you can see, and I just drop it into the Action Pod. And as you can see, it disconnects the Go 3S and, of course, pairs with the Go 3 camera. And, of course, whenever I want to switch back to the Go 3 camera, as long as it's powered on, I drop it in here and it goes back to the Go 3S. And the Action Pod will stay paired with the Go 3S, of course, even if it's removed from the Action Pod. If I place a different camera into the Action Pod, which is turned off now in this case, as you can see, it charges the camera, but as you can see, it remains paired with the last camera that was connected. Even if I were to power off the Action Pod, you can see it also powers off the last paired camera, and when I power it back on again, you'll notice that it connects with the Go 3S, the last paired camera, and powers it on also. So I have completed the upgrade by adding the Go 3S camera to my Go 3 Action Pod. The question now is this now every bit as good as just buying a Go 3S, or are there any downsides or compromises with this upgrade path? I think the main consideration is the Action Pod itself. Is the Go 3 Action Pod in any way inferior to the Go 3S Action Pod? And in my testing, I have to say no. As far as I can tell, they are absolutely identical when it comes to performance. The startup time with both is absolutely identical. All the menus and displays are identical, as are the responsiveness of those menu items and displays. I tested the latency of the real-time display and found it to be the same on both. I tested the range of operation. I tested battery life and charging. I even tested data transfer speeds. Everything about the performance of the two Action Pods is identical. The only difference that you're going to see is a lack of an S on the front of the Action Pod itself. Now, that all being said, it seems that there are differences to the internal components on the two Action Pods, because if you look at the two firmware versions, you will see that they operate using different firmwares, which indicates that there are differences internally. But in all the testing I did, I can say that I found no difference between the performance of the Go 3S, whether it's in the Go 3 Action Pod or the Go 3S Action Pod. Okay, so much for the Action Pod. What about the other accessories? And there are basically three that we're going to be talking about: the magnetic pendant, the easy clip, and the pivot stand. Now, as far as the magnetic pendant is concerned, as you can see, they've made some design changes, and they've also made a change to the magnet, I guess, so it kind of locks in place whether you have it horizontally or vertically. To be honest, if I do that with the old magnet pendant, I really don't think it makes that much difference. As far as the easy clip is concerned, They look identical, but what they've done with the new version is they've actually included a metal plate in here, which allows you to then use it in combination with the magnetic pendant and get a better adjustment of the angle of the camera. So that's definitely a useful upgrade. And finally, if we compare the pivot stands, here too they've made a small upgrade. The base on the old pivot stand was solid, whereas on the new pivot stand it is flexible, allowing it to stick better to an uneven surface, and you have this tethered cover. So again, a minor but useful upgrade. So as far as the other accessories is concerned, yes, there are a few minor upgrades. I don't think anything that's going to make a big difference in terms of which upgrade path you choose. And of course, if any of the newer version accessories appeals to you particularly, of course you can buy that separately anyway. Now, of course, that will add to your overall cost, but that's something we're going to talk about in the next section. So let's talk about money. If you want to upgrade your Go 3 to a Go 3S, you basically have two options. You sell off your Go 3 and buy the full Go 3S kit, or you keep your Go 3 and you buy the standalone camera and upgrade just like we've detailed throughout this video. So let's compare both of those different options, and we'll take the example of upgrading from the 128GB Go 3 to the 128GB Go 3S. So if you're buying the full Go 3S 128GB version in the US, that comes in at $430, but of course depending on where you live you may have to add sales tax to that. The average is around about 7%, so that makes this around about $460. Next, let's look at selling off your old Go 3. Now, if you go on eBay, you'll find that these are selling for anywhere between $250 to $300. Of course, you're going to have to pay some fees on that if you sell through eBay or something similar. So realistically, you're probably looking at around about $250 at best for your Go 3. So buying the full Go 3S kit and selling off your Go 3 is going to cost you somewhere around $200 to $210. Now, if we compare that to buying the Go 3S standalone, the 128GB version sells for $270 in the US. Again, if we add average tax onto that, it's more like $290. So the cost to upgrade using the standalone camera is actually $80 more expensive than buying the new Go 3S kit and selling off your old Go 3. But of course there is one important thing that we're forgetting there, and that is if you buy the standalone Go 3S, you end up with both cameras, the Go 3S and your original Go 3. Now, I'm not sure what the market is for a used Go 3 standalone camera, but I'm sure there are people out there looking for a replacement camera or maybe one to add to their current setup, and in that case I'm sure you could get somewhere in the range of $120 to $150 for it without too much difficulty. And in that case then, the upgrade using the standalone camera does make more financial sense. Or, of course, instead of selling off the camera, you could keep it yourself and have two cameras which share the same action pod, just as we saw earlier. At the beginning of the video, we posed 3 key questions about upgrading your Go 3 by using the Go 3S standalone camera. First of all, is it simple? I would say absolutely yes, it really couldn't be much simpler. Secondly, is the upgrade effective? And here too, I would say absolutely yes. There is no difference as far as I can tell between operating a Go 3S camera in the Go 3 action pod versus a Go 3S action pod. And apart from some very minor differences in the accessories, there are really no disadvantages. And thirdly, is it cost effective? And once again, I would have to say yes, that buying the Go 3S standalone camera is a more cost-effective solution than buying the full 3S kit. And as we also saw, I think the idea of buying the standalone camera as a way of expanding on your current kit with a second camera will also appeal to many users. So that covers it for another video. I hope you enjoyed it and got good information out of it. If so, please remember to give us a like and consider subscribing to the channel for a lot more similar content. If you have any questions, any comments, if you have suggestions for future videos, please drop those into the comments section. Otherwise, thank you for watching.